I'm Chad Ezell, and this is Three Chords and the Truth, a podcast that explores the connection between God and good music.
We recorded a podcast and somehow the audio didn't show up, and so we had to
do the whole thing again.
Yeah. Or you didn't like something that I said and made us do it again. I don't know. One of those two.
That is absolutely possible today. Because I have no clue what you're going to say.
Yeah.
I do have a question to start, though. So I kind of had this idea to do this podcast series, right? And I started asking people, hey, if you want to do this, I think it'd be cool to have other voices on here. And so pick a song and we'll start talking about it on a podcast. But you didn't pick a song. You went with like a whole album. So I want to know, Kirby, why do you think you're better than us?
You know, I just can't follow directions is really what it is. No, so I went through and I listened to as much Sturgill as I could. And I mean, I've listened to a lot over the years, but I wanted to listen again and, listen closely, not just, passive listening. And I came up on the Ballad of Dude and Juanita, and the whole thing's just a story. Like, you can't just talk about one song from that album. I mean, the whole thing is a story from start to finish. I mean, he talks about Dude, and then talks about their relationship and their marriage, and talks about the kidnapping, and of course I'm spoiling here, but then his dog dies. I mean, it's just
there's a whole song about his dog dying.
Yeah, it's a journey, and I don't think you can pick one song from it. You just got to talk about the whole thing, man.
It's crazy to me, and we are jumping ahead a little bit here, but if you go to Spotify and look up Sturgill Simpson, Sam, the story of a dead dog, is number one. And I think that's interesting. And it's also, I think, interesting that whenever I first started doing this, some of my friends here had never listened to Sturgill, and they started listening to it. I guess they started at number one on Spotify, and Sam was it. And they're like, why did you recommend this guy who has a song about his dead dog?
I think it probably has something to do with a large portion of Sturgill's demographic probably doesn't have kids, nor wants kids. And they're dog people. I mean, that's just that's our thing. That's our society now, is dog people. And so man's best friend, man.
So tell me just off the cuff here, like, out of all of the songs that you could have picked, you picked an album about, kind of set in the 1800s of, old folks who have this crazy love story. Why this album, just to start? We're going to dive into this for who knows how long. I don't know. The whole album's like 28 minutes long, so it's not a huge work, but why pick this out of everything you could have picked? Why this one?
Man, you had already recorded on the best songs, so I had to just no, it's just it's some great storytelling. Like, this album, the whole album is one continuous story. I mean, he sings about his mule, he sings about his dog, he sings about anything and everything, and it's just one continuous story. And that just sort of is cool. It appeals to me. I don't know many albums where it's one coherent story, and I just thought that was neat, and it would be fun to talk about.
Do you think there's something about us as humans that are just drawn to a story?
Oh yeah.
What is it? I mean, you've kind of studied some of this stuff, I think, right?
Yeah, I think a little bit. Yeah. I mean, stories are the way that we connect with the world around us, the way that we connect with each other. I mean, I think probably the first religious texts weren't texts at all. They were stories that people told.
What do you mean by that? Like,
well, I think that, writing and paper and utensils and reading were not ubiquitous like they are now. And so the way that people communicated religion, the way that people communicated emotion, they communicated it through stories. They told stories. I guess a religious example of this is the existence of creeds in the early church. They didn't have the Bible. I mean, they didn't have 15 Bibles sitting on their shelf at home. And so they had these short little ways of summing up the Bible. And they told stories about it. And I think that's a way that we've always communicated, and it just is deep down inside of us. We want to hear a good story.
And so that's kind of why you picked this album, because it's a story. What's the story about?
So you knew some background on this that I didn't know. And by the way, another reason I picked this album is because my grandmother's name is Juanita. So the Ballad of Dude and Juanita, I don't know, it kind of resonated with me. And she too, like he says in the album, that there's no senoritas in the mountains.
Yeah.
Where'd she get her
Where'd your
name?
mama get that name?
Yeah. There's no senoritas in the plains of Oklahoma where my grandmother are from. They named her Juanita, and I have no idea why, but so that kind of resonated with me. Background that this story is something that that Sturgill wrote when his grandfather died, and he wrote it for his grandmother. Is that right?
Seems like it. Yeah, I think I read an article about that at some point.
Yeah, and I hadn't heard that. But to me, that's compelling. I mean, he's writing this story as just sort of a memory for his grandmother, to get her through until they're reunited. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, and that just is that's interesting. And just the title, The Ballad of, like anytime you see that, I mean, there's like the movie on Netflix, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. That just is that's a fascinating thing. And then Dude, Dood.
Yeah.
I mean, old dude, like that, just it catches your attention. And the first time I saw it, I just thought that's really neat, and the album artwork is neat. And then I started listening, and I couldn't stop.
Yeah, so it opens with this prologue track and it's like this Confederate, beat of the drums, and it's like you're kind of set in this old, 19th century scene, and it's kind of the story of a rescue to begin. Is that kind of how you listen to it? Like he's this rough guy, Dude is, and then apparently Sturgill's grandmother meets him, Juanita, and kind of rescues him out of that life. And so immediately, I think you kind of have this story of redemption, which is, man, if we're talking about like how some of Sturgill's thoughts tie in with Scripture thoughts, there's so many stories of redemption in Scripture. I mean, it's kind of the meta narrative of the whole thing, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the first song, Old Dude, describes Sturgill as just this rough, tough John Wayne kind of character. He's mean. He's a sharpshooter. I think the line, it's used in Old Dude Part 1, and it's used at the very end as well as sort of like a bookend for the album. Harder than the nails in Jesus' hands is the way that he describes Old Dude. He's just rough.
I wanted to ask you. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Like, is that a compliment?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I certainly, I think from a worldly perspective, that could be considered a compliment. I mean, I don't know what all of the listeners, what their background is or who they listen to, but I could certainly see a large portion of our population, harder than nails, manly, rough and tough. Like those are good qualities to them. I don't know that biblically speaking that necessarily is a good quality. Maybe in certain parts of the Old Testament that might be a good quality, but yeah,
hold on. Like tougher than nails is, I mean, I think you would see that as kind of a positive attribute in our world, right? And maybe in a lot of societies, toughness is a good thing. We want to be resilient and all of that, tough. But when you add the additional descriptor of what is it, harder than the nails hammered in Jesus' hands,
yeah,
that adds a little bit of a different layer, right?
Yeah. I think that's probably makes it negative. Yeah, you're right. I mean, we need toughness in our world. I mean, I think probably now more than ever we're pretty weak. Good times make for weak men, probably, and and we're pretty weak, and we need some toughness. But yeah, the harder than the nails in Jesus' hands, that I think that signifies some sort of violence, inherent in it. It's not this that he's tough; it's that he's rough, and maybe mean. And yeah, as the album goes into the next song, Juanita just sort of like changes everything. He goes from being this rough, tough sharpshooter to now he's farming. I'm gonna turn your swords into plows. And he's a farmer
Oh, I
now.
hadn't picked up on that. Okay, so he goes from rough and just harder than the nails in Jesus' hands. I think there's a line somewhere in there he talks about if you cross him, you're going to bleed, and he's just a rough guy, right?
Yeah.
But then he becomes a gardener, which is
Yeah.
entirely scriptural, right? I mean, that's kind of we start in a garden, we end kind of in a garden scene, and here's this guy being redeemed out of this rough life into a garden situation. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
That's why I had you on here, man. This is good.
Man, yeah, he just Juanita changed him, softened him. And they had children, and I'm sure, I mean, as you know, as someone who has kids change you.
Hey, have you heard stories like this in like modern day times? As soon as you said that, my mind went to this elderly couple who went to church with us, and they, just kind of like a beautiful couple. And a while back, the wife passed away, and one of the things I really remember, and the husband was leader in the church. I mean, kind of a guy that you went to for wisdom, I think, always had something to say. And one of those guys that when he talks, you listen. But when his wife passed away, I'll never forget him telling me that she was the one. He was kind of like the dude in this situation, but she was the one who kind of turned him around and got him in church. And he was totally rough around the edges. And at the end, he was still kind of rough around the edges, but still, like she softened him and really brought him to who he is. Do you still hear that story sometimes in your life? I know you kind of do the same thing I do. You hear that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we hear that story all the time.
It's a positive thing too. It's like, nobody says, man, I am what I am today because of her. They don't mean that in a negative way. This is always a positive.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of our elders, just a northern guy, came from an atheistic family, just kind of rough around the edges, married a Southern girl. He's one of our elders now. Good man. I mean, I think that story is told over and over again. And I think there's something to that in the creation accounts of the Bible, that man is not meant to be alone. And, if we're alone, and we don't have that companionship. I mean, I realize some people don't ever have that companionship in marriage, but if we're alone and we don't have some sort of companionship, it is difficult for us to get rid of those rough edges.
And so there's a sense in this album, at least, where this rough tumble kind of guy is rescued by the love of his life, Juanita, and things are good for a while, right? But then kind of what happens? I mean, this is life, and so things are good for a while, but it seems like those things don't last forever most of the time. So then what happens?
Things are good for a while. He lets his guard down, and his rifle is far away from him, and he can't get to it. And a bandit comes and steals Juanita.
So this love of his life is now in danger. It's threatened, and so we have this story of rescue from, I guess, a worse kind of life, and then brought into a good kind of life. And the one who's rescued you is now gone. And so what do? This is a tough situation when life is good and then life is not good anymore. Things are great and then things kind of sour on us. What's the response? That's a question of our day, I think.
Yeah.
So what does he do?
He goes on this epic journey with old Shamrock and Sam, and goes to find Juanita and take vengeance, and bring her home. And he takes matters into his own hands. I mean, he goes right back into harder than the nails in Jesus' hands. right back into that mode.
What do you think about
And
that?
you know, um, I've been learning about family systems theory, and
Tell me
I've been
what that
learning
is.
about just the idea that that we grow up in family systems, and that's a good thing, but that we have to learn how to like differentiate ourselves from our families and from others, or we're never going to be productive adults when we get older. But there's something that they talk about is that you learn your first things, your first movements as a young person, and it's really hard to get out of those first things that you learn as you get older. I mean, they're just ingrained deep in your brain and deep in your habits, and you can kind of change those habits. But when crisis happens, we tend to go back to those things. We tend to go back to the first things that we learned, the first way of dealing with things, and it seems like
Why?
that's what old dude does.
Why is that the case? We learn these things, we have these habits,
Mm,
and whenever we things go bad or things change, we go back and I guess revert back to those old habits. Why?
mhm. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know how to speak to that in that way. But I think that there's a comfort there. Um, you know, that's what we knew for the longest amount of time. Um, you know, we want to go back to what we know best in times of crisis, and it happens.
I don't know. I mean, you talked about it's what's comfortable to us and it's what we know best and we want to go back to that. I wonder sometimes if we do those things without thinking. Like it's just becomes second nature to us.
Mhm,
And um we kind of go back to what feels natural without even thinking about it. We've kind of
mhm,
formed these mental maps of
mhm,
what our lives are going to be like, and we just revert back to those things sometimes.
mhm.
And that
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. So new habits are built on being mindful about those new habits. I'm going to constantly be mindful about this thing so I can build this new habit. And those old habits are ingrained already in our memory. And so when something bad happens, we just go back to the default.
Yeah,
And yeah, I think you're right about that.
we've kind of formed that path in our lives, and then it's just so easy to revert back to what we've always done instead of maybe what we know to be a better way. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because the better way makes, I mean, it's hard to forge a new path and create new habits and behavior patterns. And I don't know, maybe we see a little bit of that here. But then there's this song that is along that way, along that path, the journey, and it's the song "Played Out." Did you
Mm.
think about that one a lot?
Yeah, yeah, that
That's one that
one.
I keep going back and you listen to it, and man, it's sad. Um, but I want to get your take on this line. He talks about I don't remember what verse it's in, but he talks, and I may get it wrong, but he says something about man, I've pushed so hard, I'm going insane, and Lord, don't let this journey be all in vain.
Mm,
Does that resonate?
mhm,
What
mhm.
do you think about that line?
Well, to me, that sounds like white knuckling your way through a situation and then realizing that it's probably not going to work out. And as a last ditch effort, you just sort of say, Lord, make this work.
Yeah,
I hope this happens. I hope this goes through okay. Don't let this be in vain. It's almost like the way the lyric stands, it almost like it's an afterthought. He's worked so hard, he's so tired, and now he's calling on the Lord for help.
it's kind of like I mean, he's in despair at that point, and it seems like a very dark situation, and um, where's the light at the end of the tunnel at that
Hmm.
point, and it's almost like I don't know. What do you think that? What are some situations, I guess, today where you think we would see something like that, or have emotions like that?
Well,
I
I
know I'm
mean,
kind of putting you on the spot with a big question here, but like those are, you know, I think those are the big questions of our day because we want bright and happy and fun and
mm,
um, you and I both work in churches and we want to. Well, I don't know about you, but in my experience, there's always kind of this draw to make things bright and cheery and happy, and everybody
mm,
leave with a smile on their face, and feel good about yourself and stuff like that. But the reality of life is that sometimes you don't, and sometimes there's darkness. Our Juanita has left,
mm,
and the marriage is on the rocks, and the kids don't talk to us anymore, and you know things aren't good at home, and things aren't good at our job or whatever. And so there's despair and darkness. And,
mhm.
how does that resonate for people today? I think is a good question.
And it seems like those bad things sort of come like as a snowball. They grow and grow and grow. I know we both live in the South, so snowballs aren't a huge thing for us, but they get bigger and bigger, and things just add to it. It's like in the song, Juanita gets kidnapped. He's tired. Shamrock the mule's tired, and then at the end of the song, the dog dies.
Yeah.
Sam's torn to pieces, and it just seems like those things grow on each other. And I think everybody resonates with that. I mean, no matter where you are in life, no matter what demographic you're in, what kind of job you have, that we all have situations where we're in a valley in life. Maybe we've just come off of a mountaintop, but now we're in a valley and things are going wrong and bills are coming in the mail, and we don't want to have to pay them. And you get sick and you got to go to the doctor, and you've got this big hospital bill, and I mean those things they snowball. And obviously we're living in a different time than dude. We're not riding on mules. Our dog's not running off after coyotes out in the wilderness. But we do have similar difficulties of bills, cancer, loved ones getting sick, busyness. Our kids have all kinds of stuff going on. Kid comes home with a bad grade. You're wondering if you've been a good parent your whole life. I mean, those things just pile on, and you're played out, man.
You mentioned a word that I was going to bring up at some point, or I hoped to bring up some point. We're just very busy.
Mm,
Like John Mark Comer writes some things about chronic busyness, which I think are really, really good things that I don't want to hear. And I think people in our world don't want to hear things about how we're too busy. We kind of, we have, it's instilled in us a great work ethic and to be busy, and idle hands are the devil's workshop or something like that. Um, but maybe there are some negatives to a chronic busyness.
mm.
For instance, I mean, how do you think that chronic busyness kind of thing might impact our relationship with God?
Mm.
And would it have an impact?
Yeah. Yeah. So, we talked about how toughness is a virtue earlier. And I certainly think that's true. And I think
Sure.
for people who count toughness as a virtue, they also have come to count busyness as a virtue. Okay. I've always got something going on. I'm always accomplishing something. I'm always doing something great. And so busyness has become a virtue. I mean, you've probably heard someone brag about how busy they are, right? Like,
Sure.
hey, how you doing? Oh man, I'm just busy, and it's sort of like a bragging moment. And I think, man, I think that the enemy is so wily and just crafty. And I think he's used that busyness to distract us. He's used that busyness to distract us from what matters, from our family, from God,
Is it a
from
Lewis quote where he
church.
says, if the devil can't make you bad, he'll make you busy? Maybe that's not C.S. Lewis, but it sounds like it could be.
Yeah, it sounds like C.S. Lewis. We'll go with it. Someone might correct us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I talk a little bit about Sabbath here
This
from the
this
Old
is your
Testament?
world, man. I'm just living in it, and I'm just asking questions.
Okay. So I think that
Sabbath,
uh,
like the seventh day of the week, Sabbath?
Yeah, so the weekly observance of Sabbath in the law of Moses, I believe, was a deterrent.
Hold on a sec. We don't live under the law of Moses.
Right? Yeah, yeah. You're right. We're not subject to the law of Moses in the same way that the Israelites were, for sure. But I think the principle of Sabbath is one that overarches the law of Moses. In fact,
Why do you think that?
well, I mean, the creation account, God rested on the seventh day. That's long before Moses. Long
You're not
before
God.
Moses. Yeah, I'm not God, obviously, but I want to be like God.
I'm absolutely just messing with you.
Yeah, I know. So, um, I mean, I don't think that we need to follow a law of Sabbath today. Like, I don't think every Saturday we've got to, follow Sabbath laws. That's not the case. But I do think the principle of Sabbath is something that is overarching throughout all time.
What is
And
that principle? Like, what do you mean by the principle of Sabbath?
the idea of stopping and resting and focusing on God. And that's what Sabbath was. So it was a love of self. I'm going to stop and I'm going to rest and I'm going to take care of myself one day. One day a week. It was a love of your neighbor. I'm not going to make my neighbor work for me. Okay. My servant, my male servant, my female servant, anybody that's in my household, anybody that comes into town, they can't work on Sabbath either. So it was a love of neighbor. And then obviously it was a love of God because it was a day in which they remembered God and they remembered their blessings of God. And they simply stopped all that they were doing. And that was a weekly reminder. It was like every week there was this reminder, the things that we have going on, picking up manna and picking up quail and picking up our tent and walking through the wilderness and all of those things that they had going on. The one day of the week, the Sabbath, was this weekly reminder that they needed to stop and they needed to stop being so busy and they just needed to focus on what was important. I think our world really, our modern world really needs something like that.
So let me. I'm going to share a quote with you. It's interesting you bring up Sabbath. Well, I kind of assumed you would bring up Sabbath, but it's interesting that a friend of mine is reading a book on the Sabbath right now. It's just called The Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. You ever heard of him?
Mhm.
Okay. And he shared this quote with me last night. And the quote is, and I want you to respond to this. What we are depends on what the Sabbath is to us. Similarly, the Sabbath does not simply come into being on Saturdays. The depth of its experience is created by how we behave the other 6 days of the week. They are a pilgrimage to the Sabbath. What do you
Mm.
think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good reference to the idea that they had to prepare for the Sabbath under the law of Moses. I mean, if there's going to be this day where you can't do any work, you got to get all your work done before that. And so I think today, if we were to talk about Sabbath in a modern context, not in a law keeping context, obviously, but just a modern context of following the principle of Sabbath, there is a preparation that's needed in order to actually do Sabbath. You've got to prepare your mind for that. In our modern world, where anything happens, and one ring of the phone, one buzz of a text message can just send you into 3-4 hours of work. I think there's some mental preparation that has to happen before Sabbath can take place. And
Are you
so, yeah,
saying
I think
that
days lead up to the seventh day.
are you saying that something like this doesn't happen accidentally?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't happen without planning.
Okay. So the Sabbath concept of just taking a step back and I think about relaxing maybe. I really think about just enjoying life as God's gift to you as part of the Sabbath principle, right?
Yeah.
Not a command to for a 24-hour period or something,
Mhm.
but just the general concept of taking time to rest and enjoy God's gift to you. That doesn't happen on accident, by accident. That must take some kind of planning because, I mean, the fact of life is that there are things that have to get done and things that we
Mhm.
have to do. And um, we have to prepare. The day of preparation, I think, was
Mhm.
part of the customary practice in the Old Testament. Yeah, to prepare to be able to take a rest, to take a step back and enjoy some of God's gifts.
Mhm.
Um, Otherwise, I think that line in Sturgill's song really does resonate. We push too hard and we're going insane, and we hope that everything that we're involved in and all that we're doing and the activities and the kids stuff and our stuff and just obligations, you kind of hope that it's not all in vain.
Mm,
But maybe deep down, we think that it may be. What do you
mhm.
think?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I certainly think that doing things and making plans without God, um, and just allowing the busyness of the world to wash over us and not considering God in those plans, there's going to be some vanity involved there. There's going to be
What do
some
you mean
empty.
by what do you mean by vanity?
Well, vanity, vain. There's going to be some emptiness. There's going to be a void that's created there that needs to be filled with something greater than just accomplishing all the things we want to accomplish. Um, and man, I think there are a lot of people that are played out, and they need. Uh, they have a hole. They have a space of vanity, a hole in their lives, and they need something to fill it, and they're looking for something. I mean, people are looking for things, and I think there's a place for the church to speak the good news and let people know that it doesn't have to be vain.
Okay,
It doesn't have to be empty.
couple of follow-ups on that. Number one, what do you think it is about our culture that contributes so much to the mindset of busyness, or just the culture of busyness, I guess? Um, what contributes to that? And then I have another follow-up, but go ahead with that one first.
I mean, am I allowed to say capitalism?
Again, this
Just
is your world. I may
the
regret this, but I've only invited you on to talk about it.
the almighty dollar, I've got to keep up with the Joneses, the advertising of you need to have this kind of life and you need to live in this kind of house and you need to drive this kind of car and you need to have this kind of job and you need to wear these kinds of clothes. And I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, there's a constant barrage. And now it's constant because we have a computer in our pockets that we look at all day, every day, that's constantly barraging us with you need to do this and you need to do that. And that just pushes, I mean, that's what pushes busyness. I think it's our society.
I said I had two follow-up questions. I now have three follow-up questions. Um, and the one that I've just added is this one. How would I know if this was a problem for me? In other words, like, how would I know if I were on the journey to really being played out and pushing too hard and driving myself crazy? Um, how would I, like, what are some signs maybe that may be a problem for me?
Hmm. Um, well, I mean, like Sturgill, are you going insane? Are you stressed
Some days,
out? What's that? Some
some
days.
days.
Okay. Are you stressed out? Um, do you have, classic signs of stress? Do you have heartburn, indigestion? Are there physical signs? Are there mental signs? Are there spiritual signs of, this is too much? I mean, do you get to close to the end of the day and you're just worn slap out, as they say here in the South, and you have nothing left? Um, you know, how are you short with your loved ones? Like when you come home from work, and your wife wants to talk about her day, and you want to say, "Honey, can we talk about this later?" What's going on in your brain? What are your energy levels like? I mean, I think there's lots of signs of that.
Yeah, but what do you say to someone who says, "That's just life"? I mean, of course we work hard and we get tired, and at the end of the day, we're ready to just maybe sit and watch, I don't know, The Office or something for a couple of hours. I mean, what do you say to somebody who says, "No, that's just what life is"?
I think there's a certain truth to that. I mean, that life is, I mean, we live in a fallen world, and life is difficult. And so there are going to be those difficulties, and it is going to be tiring. We are going to toil in our labor, as you know, God told Adam. But I think that we have listened to a particular story in our society. You know, we started this talking about stories, and
Look at you bringing it full circle. What story are you talking about now?
we've listened to this particular story that you know, here is a successful man. He works so many hours a week, and he provides so many dollars for his family, and he uh, is rough and tough and harder than the nails in Jesus' hands, and he can't be emotional, and he can't cry, and he, um, you know, another part of the story is that now in our modern time we live in a kindergarchy ruled by children, and our children's
We live in a
schedules
what?
a kindergarchy, okay, a
You,
kindergarchy.
you made that up.
No, I didn't. It's a real word. Look it up.
It's
Kindergarten.
not a real word.
It is. It is. You know, we live in this society where our children rule our schedules, and that's the story. So for some people, the story they've listened to is that you know, they're gonna have a family, and they're gonna have kids, which I think is a good thing. I think that's a beautiful thing. But our modern world has allowed our kids to rule our lives. That's what I mean by kindergarthy, rule by
Okay.
children. And I mean, you look at this like, I mean, you look at the go to a baseball field on Sunday morning and look at all these people that have chosen to be there, and they've spent hundreds of dollars to travel to this field, and hundreds of dollars to be a part of this team for their child, because they think, you know, somehow their child's going to be a professional baseball player. And I mean, that's the story that people have told themselves, like, this is what families do, this is what successful families do, we're gonna be you know, baseball family. Or I mean, maybe that's not a story, maybe I don't know, Chad, maybe it's golf. um
You need
or
to watch your step now.
yeah, I know. Maybe it's um you know, just working all the time. But there are these stories that we've listened to, that have told us, um, this is what you need to be a real man. This is what you need to do to be a real woman. This is what you need to do to be a real American family. And
This what I hear you saying sounds, I think, a lot like James K.A. Smith's concepts in Desiring the Kingdom. You're familiar, I think, right?
Mhm,
You are what you love.
mhm,
Um, and so we are. What I think I hear you saying is that we're kind of shaped by our society, our culture, the people around us. You know,
mhm,
their views, their behaviors, their habits kind of shape our views, our behaviors, and our habits, which
mhm,
can be a great thing,
mhm,
right? I mean, that's if I am intentionally placing myself around people who I want to rub off on me in good ways, then
mhm.
that's a great thing. But
Yeah.
if if I don't recognize that I'm being shaped by everything and everyone around me, then it can be a very dangerous thing,
Mhm,
right? I mean, it's the whole I forget who said it first, but a goldfish doesn't know that he's swimming in water. If you ask him what the water's like, he'd be like, what are you
yeah,
talking about, water?"
right.
Um, and so I think even talking about the major narratives in our culture, or the stories that we tell ourselves, that we are told, that we just kind of overlook and don't think critically about, we just kind of accept things as they are because that's how they are. Those things shape us, and that can be a very dangerous thing, can it?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's why Paul says in Romans 12, "Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds." You know, there is and we have to take an active part in being transformed by the renewing of our minds, because in the world we're constantly being formed. We're constantly being formed in one way or another. The shows that we watch, the news that we watch, the media that we consume, the things that we do on our phones, constantly being formed. And like you said, that can be a good thing, but man, there's a lot of bad stuff out there too that we got to be careful
We
about.
are constantly, I think, in the process of becoming who we're going to be. We're
Mhm.
always growing up into the person that we're going to be. And I personally think that we ought to be aware of what those external forces are that shape us. I mean, and
Mm,
really give some thought, not just go with the flow all the time, which I think is maybe one of the best arguments for some kind of Christian community, whether
mm,
that's a small group of folks who that you study scripture with and work through some of these concepts with, or just kind of have the same morals and ethics,
mm.
so that you're not, being drugged down, I guess, or church that will encourage you and support you and challenge you in some of those areas. To me, what I'm hearing is like a definite need for a support system of like-minded people with the same morals, ethics, desires, goals, hopes, and dreams in life. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, isn't that what happened to Dude? Old
Like what?
Dude? I mean, he uh, raised by a minor, and what's the line?
A Shawnee.
And a Shawnee maiden. Um,
Yeah.
and that first song talks about him, like he knows how to use a tomahawk and scalp. And I mean, like he's formed by this way that he was raised, and then he comes into the world of Juanita and has kids and becomes this peaceful farmer, and seemingly is living a different life. But as soon as that falls apart, where is he back to?
It's
He's
back to
right
what
back
his
to
formative years, right?
yeah, right back to harder than nails in Jesus' hands. Um, and we haven't gotten to the end of the album yet, but man, there's a scary picture there at the end of what even after he has Juanita back, what he's willing to go to
Well,
his
don't jump
community.
ahead to that. I've only asked two of my three follow-up questions.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
My third question is, why is it so hard to, if we can pinpoint what the things are in our lives that contribute to a culture of busyness in our life, right?
Mm,
Why is it so hard to eliminate those things? Like if we can look at them and say, I know why I'm so busy. It's because I do this, 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 and that. And the kids do this, 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 and that other thing. I know why I'm so busy. And if we know, like maybe subconsciously, or deep down, we know that those things are definitely not maybe aiding in my spiritual life and could be um, detracting from my spiritual life. Why is it so hard to eliminate that stuff?
mm. I think what you're talking about is idols, aren't you? I mean, really, like the things
Why would you
that
say,
we.
like, that's an interesting word that I didn't use,
Okay.
but why did you use it?
Um, I mean, okay, so idolatry is not something we think about in a modern context. I mean, we're not bound down to little statues or something like that. But I think the sentiment of lifting this thing up and elevating it in your life is definitely still here today. And um, we we build up idols in our lives, these things that we've elevated higher than they should be in our lives. And I think in a culture where the story is busy is good, we tend to elevate those things that make us busy. They keep us busy. They keep us distracted. Maybe even they bring temporary happiness, and joy uh, in some circumstances. But they're all things. Maybe they're not even bad things. Maybe they're just neutral. Maybe they're not bad. They're just neutral. But the way that they are being used in our lives is a very negative thing.
I
And
think
it is a very
so
negative
Tim
way.
Keller has a book, Counterfeit Gods. Have you
Mhm,
read that one? And it's all about kind of the idols of today's world. Obviously, they're not, graven images that we're sticking on our mantle anymore.
mm,
They can be good things. And I think the way that he defines idol at some point in that, it's been a long time, but an idol is anything in life that we make the ultimate thing of life. So it's what we elevate to the top of our priority list, and everything has to revolve around that. And that can be a good thing. Like family is a good thing. Family's a good thing.
Mm.
But if I elevate family to the absolute top rung of my ladder of priorities, then I'm probably going to start making bad decisions
Mm.
at some point. Or it could be, I mean, it could be all kinds of things. Work is a good thing. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with work. It's a good thing that we do it. But if I put that at the very top, then chances are I'm going to make bad decisions. Or
Mhm.
I don't know that there's anything inherently wrong with money. I think a desire for it or a love for it can be inherently wrong. I just saw the way that you looked at me, and I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. But you or I can use what money we have for good. It can do good things, or I can hoard it and selfishly use it, and that can become not just a bad thing, but a practice that forms the rest of my behaviors in life. I mean, we're in the process of becoming who we're going to be, right? Why did you look at me with a smirk?
Oh, just money. I mean, this is money. I think I'm at the place now where money is definitely a tool that can be used for good or for bad. It's a neutral thing. I mean, it's a total construct of our society. I mean, we've made it up. It's not real. I mean, there's no real value to the dollar bill. But it's a tool. So I used to be kind of in the category of money is bad. I think one time I asked you how much your insurance policy was and kind of razzed you a little bit by about how much it was. One time several years ago. I think I've moved on from that. I was kind of young and naive, but at the same time, someone who falls into the trap of loving money is definitely someone who doesn't see any danger in it. And doesn't see it as a potential idol, as a potential god that we lift up over anything else.
Yeah.
So
So I mean, like the customary idols, I guess, in our society may be, I don't know, money and sex and power and security and things like that, right? So,
Mhm.
um, and maybe those things are just ingrained in our society and overlooked by our society, and that may be a big reason that we don't notice them a whole lot. You have to really think critically about life to start to notice those things.
Mhm.
Um, but did you talk about why it's hard to eliminate those? Is it just because they're so ingrained?
Yeah, they're ingrained. They're idols. I mean, why was Israel so bad at getting rid of the idols that they had inherited through the Canaanite people?
I don't know.
Because it's something that they wanted. I mean, it's something that they desired. If we want something, we don't really want to get rid of it. Like I really want a cheeseburger, but I don't need it. But my whole life, that's what I want to do. I'm going to eat this cheeseburger because I really want it, and I don't want to stop eating cheeseburgers. The things that we really want and that we really desire, when someone tells us, as broken individuals who want to be the king of our own hearts rather than Jesus being the king of our heart, when someone tells us to do something, we don't want to do it. It's just it's built in.
Is it dangerous to keep doing that kind of stuff?
Hmm.
Like, what
Yeah.
kind of negative effects would that bring? Because I mean, sometimes we look at life and I think it would be easy to look and say, there are people who don't ever give any thought to some of the things we're talking about right now, and they're okay. Like from my perspective, they look like they're doing really well. So
Mm.
what? How do you make sense of that?
Well, I think that you're still viewing things by a particular story. They look like they're doing really well according to the the American dream. They got a house, they got two cars, they've got their kids are in sports, and they're doing okay. They go on two vacations a year. They go to Disney, right, Chad? And
I hope not.
they just they seem like they have it going on, but like that's not the story that you and I have come to believe. I mean, that's the story that a certain version of person is telling. But that's not the story that you and I have come to believe in bowing down to King Jesus. And so I think that we see people and we look, oh yeah, they're all right. They look happy. They have a decent marriage. He's never beat her. She's not a nag. That looks okay. And those are certainly good things, but like, those aren't the only things. There's a lot under the surface that's more important. That's even more important than that.
So how do we get on this? Was this is this from Played Out? Like when he
Yeah.
talks about so much going on and I'm wearing myself out and I'm pushing
Yeah.
too hard and I'm going insane and I hope this isn't in vain. Is that where we got this?
This is played out. This is the modern person is not played out because they're, riding their mule through the wilderness. The modern person is played out because they have too much stuff and they're doing too much stuff.
I'm thinking about Mary and Martha when Jesus goes to their house and Martha's in the kitchen working. I think she's in the kitchen. Does it say she's in the kitchen?
Yeah, she's working in the kitchen, I think.
She's working. She's taking care of the house stuff. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Mary's not. Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary has chosen the better part. I think those are the words of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a problem with that? Because I think just about every time I've preached something about that, I'll have people who come up to me and say, you're too hard on Martha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a little bit too easy to say, well, it wasn't me, it was Jesus that said that. But
yeah, every time. I've spoken about that passage, I don't know, several times. And there's always someone that says, well, I'm a Martha and I think it's okay. And I think there is something to say that Jesus says Mary has chosen the better part. He doesn't say that, Martha, you've chosen the wrong part.
And let me be clear that, like, in another room with some Jesus followers, he says, hey, none of y'all are doing the Martha thing of serving and nobody's washed our feet since we came in here, so let me get down there and do the Martha thing.
Right.
And so I'm not saying that what she did was evil or anything like that. But Mary's definitely the one who is celebrated in that story. And I don't know, I think sometimes we have a problem with that.
For
because
sure.
we feel like somebody's got to do the Martha stuff. Like if somebody's got to do it.
If someone doesn't do it, it's not going to get done.
Yeah. And I think about Jesus talking about, is it the parable of the sower when he talks about, sometimes the seed falls on rocky soil or the wayside, and sometimes it falls in a place where it doesn't really take root because the cares of life and the deceitfulness of riches come in and swipe it away. That's just part of our world. I mean, we will always have those struggles, I think, right? The temptation of going so hard and pushing too hard to where we just kind of get played out. But then there's this interesting phrase from Paul when he writes, and he tells the Christians to be anxious for nothing. Is that a call to remove anxiety from our life? Is that how you read it?
Yeah, this is a tough subject because we live in a modern world where anxiety is definitely heavily medicated.
And so my question outside of medication is, like, he's pretty clear and he says, be anxious. Don't be anxious. Be anxious for nothing. Is that possible?
I don't know, man. I don't know. It certainly hasn't been possible with me so far. I definitely have not mastered that verse. I try to cast my cares on the Lord. I try to take everything to Him in prayer and thanksgiving, but I have not mastered being anxious for nothing.
Do you think could that be a product of our culture and our society, or are there other societies in which that may be more attainable?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. People talk about work-life balance today, and I don't want to have a job where I'm working all the time, and I have I don't have any time for my life, and I think about 200 years ago. Those same people would be out in the field, 18 hours a day, plowing and working, and so I certainly don't want to be someone who thinks today is, the worst time in history. I mean, we live in the easiest and best time in history, probably. But I do think that there is a part of our society that feeds on our anxieties, and creates more anxieties. The obsession with money and with success and things like that. I mean, that you're going to create anxiety. You're going to create, something that you're going to worry about in those. I mean, when needs have been replaced with wants, and those wants don't always get fulfilled, that creates anxiety. Okay, Jesus talks in his sermon on the mount about, like, don't worry, God's going to take care of you. He's going to give you food. He's going to take care of you like the flowers of the field, and like the sparrows in the sky. We don't really have a concept of the difference between needs and wants today. And so I think a lot of our wants don't get fulfilled and we become anxious. And man, that's a dangerous thing.
What role does comparison play in that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, comparison is the thief of joy. Is that the quote? Is that the saying?
Is it a you quote? Did you make that up?
No, that's a thing. I don't know who said it, but that's a thing. I've heard someone say that before. Comparison is the thief of joy. I look at, I mean, not to get too personal here, but like, look, I have an old beat up minivan, and my wife would tell you she's about tired of it because the sliding doors don't open very well.
So do you have to file in through the driver's door?
So sometimes our kids, when they won't open, our kids have to file in, and I'm looking at all these people that like I go to drop my daughter off at gymnastics, and I'm looking at all these people, and every one of them's got like a brand new Tahoe, and I'm and I definitely think about sometimes, comparing myself to them, and I'm like, man, I wish I didn't have this junky minivan, and I had a brand new Tahoe. That would be really nice. But man, we can't do that. That just adds anxiety. I'm not going to have a Tahoe. I'm not going to be able to afford that anytime soon. So stop worrying about it. Stop thinking about it. So we're played out, man.
So we're like halfway through the album. I want to jump to the end.
Okay.
Because let me. Long story short, I've been trying to find the comparison as the thief of joy. President Theodore Roosevelt.
Teddy.
There you go.
Oh, Teddy.
Okay, so the played out, like he's worn out. He's on the chase. Can't find his wife. Thief. What did you call him? I don't know how you described him earlier. A bandit has come and taken his wife, and he and his steed Shamrock and his dog Sam are out on the hunt, and they've lost Sam for 5 days, and then they don't hear Sam barking anymore, and Sam dies. Dog's dead. Terrible part in the album. But then eventually they find a tribe of Native Americans, I think, and those guys do the right thing. They're like, yeah, a guy came over here and brought this woman with him, and she's here with us, but she's your wife, so you need to go be with her, and she needs to be with you. And and there's kind of this story of everything's finally back whole, it seems like. And would you think that's good enough? Like, would it be good enough that man lost his wife, the bandit's gone, he found his wife, they could go live happily ever after? That could be what happens, right?
Sure.
Is that what happens?
If the story were a redemption story, then yes, that would be enough, because redemption would happen. Dude would have Juanita back. They'd go home to their kids. They'd go back to their life of farming. But the story that most people want to hear is not just the redemption story. It's the revenge story. And
go ahead.
And the last song on the album has old dude going and getting revenge against, what is it, Seamus? Is that the guy's name that steals Juanita? Going and getting revenge. Rather than just accepting that he's found his wife, he has to go further. He has to go get that scalp. It's a revenge story.
What leads to that?
Mm.
Because I think in the end, okay, so there's this great song, Juanita, which probably is my favorite on the whole album. And he's like under the starry sky, and he's dreaming of this woman that he's lost, and longing for her to be returned, and there's this great hope that he has. And then those hopes are realized and his longings are met, and she's returned and she's safe and sound, and there's peace and there's security whenever she finally they're finally reunited. But that is not the end of the story. That's the end of the redemption narrative arc, right? She redeemed him, and then he redeems her, and they could go live happily ever after in the end. But that's not how it plays out.
No.
And so there could be forgiveness. There's not. Or there could be revenge, and that's what we see. What do you make of that? How that whole thing works itself out?
So we have a thirst for justice.
Is that bad?
No, I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing. God is a just God. I think that we have a thirst for justice. Now, I think where the difficulty comes in is, what does justice look like?
How do you define justice?
The setting right of things, making things right. So, I
don't want to read too much into the songs, but the way that I understand it is that, like, this guy has stolen a woman and he's sold her, it seems like, to a tribe.
Right.
And then the tribe has willingly given her back to dude. And so, has justice been satisfied? Things have been set right. And
so
the only thing that's different now is the bandit is a little bit richer and the tribe is a little bit poorer. But they seem to be the ones who are saying, hey, this is okay. She's your wife, you're her husband, y'all should be together. We'll take the hit on this.
Okay, things have been set right in the sense that dude and Juanita, they have their life back. But things have not been set right in the sense that there is still a bandit who steals women that's on the loose. So this bandit has not faced the consequences of his actions. And I think that God has built into our world the concept of reaping and sowing, right? So you reap what you sow. That's a natural law built into our world. And so I think that we have a natural tendency to want to see justice take place and consequences take place for those who deserve them. Now, were there other ways for that to happen than what dude did?
What did dude do?
Well, dude goes and tracks Seamus down and shoots him, and then I guess the end of the song suggests that he scalps him. Like,
he got the scalp.
Okay, which goes even further. I mean, you could have just stopped at shooting him, dude. But then you had to go
he's harder than the nails hammered in Jesus' hands.
Woo, man. I don't know that was necessarily justice. But there is a sense in which we as human beings, we want all things to be set right. And it wasn't right that this bandit who steals women and who got rich doing it somehow is free and ready to do it again.
Reap what you sow, huh? Law of consequences and actions, right?
Yeah.
How does that fit in with someone like Jesus saying, love your enemies?
Sure.
Do good to those who would never do anything good to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it fits in that we can love our enemies knowing that God is just and that justice will be done for all wrongdoing.
So,
And
but what is
so
that? I think that's a mindset, sure.
yeah.
But what is my job?
Mm.
Like, I mean, this is a narrative album, but it presents this place to jump off and ask this question of, okay, you know, maybe nobody has stolen my wife, thank goodness. The
Mhm.
bandits haven't come to town. But yeah, I've been wronged by people, and there are probably people who would, be happy if I didn't get things. If we have disagreements, they'd be happy if I didn't get my way or something like that. What is my job and my responsibility as a follower of Jesus in that situation?
Well, I mean, do you want me to go to scripture? Because I'm thinking Romans chapter 12 is probably a pretty good place to go there. Is that okay?
Dude, you've got your Bible out.
I got my Bible out. Is that okay if we go there?
Sure.
Okay. Bless those who persecute you. This is verse 14. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. Here's verse 17. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
You don't
So,
mean that.
certainly as a human being, that is a difficult passage. I mean, someone goes and kidnaps my wife, I'm going to want to throw down in some way with that person. I'm going to
Yeah,
want
and you've been
something.
lifting weights, and so you'd be good at it.
I'm going to want something to happen, right? And I think where this becomes difficult to mesh with forgiveness is that we can forgive people while them still facing the consequences of their actions. Does that make sense?
Sure.
And not taking vengeance. So let's say that Seamus the bandit gets arrested for kidnapping. We could still pray for him and forgive him and, maybe even bring him food in jail or something like that. But still knowing that justice has been served and he's facing the consequences of his actions, and he's not going to be able to be a bandit and steal people's wives anymore for a long time because he's in jail. So I think that you have to separate justice from vengeance. They are not the same thing.
Sometimes we may couch a desire for vengeance within a desire for justice. Is that possible?
Yeah,
I want him to get what's coming to him, and in the name of him getting what's coming to him, I'm going to give him a lot more than he had coming to him.
right,
Would be vengeance, right?
right. Yeah,
It is very interesting to me that in Paul's language, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, but your job is to, I don't remember what you said.
to the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink.
I mean, that's Jesus, right? I mean, that's Matthew
Right.
25, and that's love your enemy and do good for those who would never do any good to you.
Right. But that would make for a really boring end to a wonderful bluegrass album.
It would,
Yeah.
but again, it's a jumping off point that I think promotes a very interesting question about what is our job to those who would consider us their enemies. Because as much as we want to, and we want to live at peace with all people, sometimes it's not possible. I think we have to admit that. And in that case, I don't think our job is to hunt them down, scalp them.
Yeah.
I think our job is to continue to do good to everyone that we can do good to. What are the coals of fire, by the way? I mean, that sounds very painful. And he says you'll in doing good, you'll heap coals of fire.
Yeah, heap burning coals on his head.
Okay.
Is the For so by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. I don't know. What do you think about that, Chad?
I think it's a cleansing, purifying agent.
Okay.
I don't think it's a painful. Like I don't think Paul is saying, "Hey, do something good to them, and you'll just really make them mad." I think he's saying, the coals are, you read about the coals in Isaiah. I'm a man of unclean lips, and so his lips are purified by the coals. Um, Peter is I don't think this is an accident, but Peter is warming his hands by a charcoal fire when he denies Jesus, and then he is around another charcoal fire. It's the only time that word is used in John's gospel after the resurrection, and Jesus says, "Hey, do you love me?" He's kind of being purified.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
and then I think that plays into this. I think these are purifying. Like, here's the chance to do something good before folks, so that maybe they can see what you do and how you live, and maybe this is a new chance for them and have redemption and some healing, maybe from the way they've been living their life. Is that like a pie in the sky and a naive kind of look at it? I don't think so. I think it runs against the culture or against the grain of our society and our culture, but I think it's Christianity is kind of supposed to be countercultural sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's totally unattainable, but I do think it's probably the hardest thing that God has asked us to do.
I think it's what sets Christianity apart from all the other religions is love your enemy. Like, that's unique, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the idea of even the pagans love their family members, but if you can love your enemy, that makes you more like God than anything else.
But it's interesting. Along with that, the line that Sturgill uses to talk about his shot is, it was true as David's rock or something like that.
As true as I have it written down. Shot was as true as David's rock. Yep.
I mean, that's a celebrated story in Scripture, and it's appropriated to this story. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah. Old dude got his Goliath.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and David and Goliath are David is celebrated when we talk about him as the hero who wins the battle. And I don't know, maybe in our society we celebrate someone like a dude who wins this great battle, even though it's a vengeance. David's, I don't think, was vengeance. His was justice and righteousness.
Right.
But this one is a vengeance that may be celebrated in our society. I thought of the song, "Wait in the Truck." You know that song?
I don't know that one.
Oh, do you not, for real? You joking?
No, I don't. I don't know that one.
Oh, it's a relatively new song, and long story short is this guy meets a girl, sees a girl on the side of the road on a thunderstorm night or something, and she's been beaten up pretty good, and he's just visiting. He doesn't know this girl from Adam or Eve, and he's just visiting, and he's like, "Well, where is he?" And she tells him, and he goes and shoots the guy. And that's kind of like that's kind of the whole story. Is this girl had been mistreated by this guy, and so this guy is going to get what's coming to him. And I remember one of the first times I heard it, or probably the second time I heard it, because Eli, my 12-year-old, was in the car with me, and I had him listen to it. And at the end of the song, I said, "Hey, was that a good thing to do, what he did?" And he took up for this girl, but he took up for this girl by going and ending the life of somebody else.
Right.
Is that a good thing? And I don't remember what Eli said, but he definitely didn't know. It was like, well, maybe. And I was like, well, sometimes life is tricky, and you just have to figure out what the right thing is sometimes. But that's a story that is still played out in life.
Yeah. I think that there's a good way to talk about this in distinguishing between self-defense in the moment. I'm being attacked in the moment. So let's say that old dude had been close to his rifle when Seamus the bandit is kidnapping Juanita. If he had shot Seamus the bandit right then and there when he's trying to kidnap his wife, I think there's a difference between that, violence in the name of self-defense, and violence in revenge like seeking this person out, not only shooting them, but then coming in close and getting their scalp. There's a big difference between that. And I think maybe that's Paul's point. Like, you're not going to be able to live peaceably all the time. Like, there are going to be moments where you have to defend yourself, where you have to fight. But if you're like planning out like how you're going to get this person back, that's where it's gone too far. And I
Crosses the line
definitely see that.
from justice to revenge.
Yeah, you've crossed the line from justice to revenge. And I think our society has glorified that. I mean, you watch movies and shows and video games, getting revenge is a huge theme in those.
So again, we started with stories, and we're
Mhm.
going to end with stories. And I think what I want to take away from this is that we really need to be aware of the ways that the stories that we tell in our society about ourselves, the stories that we ingest from, movies and shows and what we read and take in, we really need to be aware about how those stories shape us and our
Mm,
thinking. Because some of those things are so ingrained and institutionalized in our culture that without thinking critically about it, maybe we don't see the ways that they run against the grain of the cross. And
mm,
that should shape our view on everything. I think we should view everything through the lens of Jesus and how he lived and what he said and how he responded and
mhm,
how he told us to go about our lives. Um, and I really think we should, whenever we encounter some of these stories, or whenever we don't even, you have to be intentional about thinking about it.
mhm.
Considering does the stories that we're telling and promoting and celebrating,
Right.
are they in line with the cross and the sacrificial
Mhm,
um, nature of the cross, or are they just kind of more like my desire, what I want?
mhm.
That's a hard question.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, in some ways, violence, I mean, talking about this story, in some ways, violence, revenge, they've become respectable sins almost. I remember growing up, like, my parents would screen what I watched based on, like, bad language and sex, but not violence. Like, I mean, people are, like, getting mowed down and killed, and there's blood everywhere. Didn't care about that. But, like, the Bible has a lot more to say about that than it does about bad language, and I don't think we think about the way that forms us and desensitizes us you know, to violence and killing and murder. And man, that's just a bad thing. And we need to be aware of that. Does this line up with the cross? Does this line up with the Prince of Peace? Can I enjoy this and be entertained by this and still say I follow the Prince of Peace? That's a tough question to answer. And I'm not trying to be movie police or show police, watch what you want, but just be aware of what you're consuming and what's forming your brain.
That's good stuff. We started with the
Um,
story, we told the story, and I think being aware of the stories that shape our thinking is probably what we need to be aware of right now.
sure.
Three Chords in the Truth is about exploring the intersection of God and good music, uncovering what's real, what's good, what's beautiful in the music, and thinking about how it points us to what is true, what's really true.